Hello, everyone. Going to try to do something a little different today. I had some ideas and content that I wanted to produce, but none of it was quite long enough for its own video, and I didn't want to artificially stretch each of them into its own. So I thought maybe I'd do a sort of video, gaming, and pop culture magazine show today with a couple different focuses. Before we do start, can I get you to throw a like on this video and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of content? It really will help the channel grow, and it's going to keep this fabulous momentum that we have going. In addition, tell me what you think of this in the comments below. Tell me if you think this idea has potential to appear regularly. It's always appreciated. Again, thank you. All right. First up, it's going to be DM Boot Camp.
Let's go.
All right, so last week I ran my usual one-shot Halloween game. It's something I always love, and I think my players like it as well. I often switch up the system and the subject matter, and this year I decided to go with classic Call of Cthulhu, actually 5th edition, and kind of running a Hammer horror-inspired game. You remember those wonderful British horror movies of the 60s, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Great movies, and great inspiration for me. And I wanted to do something close to a Hammer movie that you should definitely check out. It's called The Devil Rides Out. And as I was prepping for this game, something occurred to me, and I wanted to experiment a little. If you saw my video on the Die 8 chase system, you already know that I like trying to incorporate different mechanics to see if a new idea can improve the tabletop experience. In this game, I had 13 potential villains. It was a demonic cult with 13 members. But statting up 13 people, well, doable. Just seemed like a real waste of time, especially for a one-shot. And a little bit of inspiration came to me, and I wanted to give it a whirl. So for a one-shot, you're essentially looking at a drama, a one-session movie. And I decided to make the villains' most important abilities, in this case their skill checks, flexible but still defined. And this is how I did it. I guessed that there were probably only going to be roughly 15 skill checks that I needed to make over the 4-hour session. By the way, this proved to be pretty darn accurate. I then got out 15 poker chips of different colors and organized them into piles like this. Each color corresponded to a percentage chance on a die 100, which, if you don't already know, is how you play classic Call of Cthulhu. So I had one ace up my sleeve in the form of a black chip, which represented an 80% chance of the villain's success to spend on any one skill check. Then I had 2 chips at 70%, 3 at 60%, and so on. I also resolved that if I ran out of chips, the chance of success for the villains in the remainder of the game would be a flat 25%. And this is actually quite intuitive for a one-shot, where you're not really aiming to wreck your players completely. You want some danger, but you don't want to hammer them. So if you're using the chips regularly throughout the game, your villains may only have a 25% chance to succeed on a crucial roll near the very end, kind of tipping the balance a little in your player's direction. Overall, I was quite pleased with how this worked out. It kind of dispensed with the formality of statting up a bunch of villains when it really isn't needed. But your players also know that you're following some rules, albeit to serve the needs of the story, but you are being an honest broker, as they say. And I actually would do this again in a similar one-shot. It kind of gives you a way to pump the gas or the brakes legally based on what's happening in the story. If any of you give this a try, let me know. As I said in the Die 8 Chase video, don't be afraid to alter or improve on this basic idea, and please do let me know how you've done so. But overall, I was quite pleased. I ended up using all the chips, and at the very end I had to make a couple of rolls for my villains at 25%. Don't worry, you killer DMs out there. One of my players died, and one is insane. So all was well with the world. So next up, we have our RPG Retrospective. Get on your tuxedo, find your Walther PPK, and let's go at it, shall we? So we're going to turn the clock back to 1983. Now, some remember that time as the Battle of the Bonds. That's right, Roger Moore and Sean Connery each had their own 007 movie coming out at roughly the same time. For fans of the Super Spy, it was great. It was a great time. And I must say, many folks felt compelled to choose a side. And for the record, I chose Connery and Never Say Never Again over Roger Moore's Octopussy. I still think that was a good choice in the end. But to prove how big Bond was back then, there was also a James Bond RPG. And to my knowledge, it's the one and only officially licensed Bond game ever produced. It was done with great care by Victory Games, a subsidiary of Avalon Hill. This is perhaps the best one-on-one RPG ever created. And if you think about it, it's the only game where having more than one player might seem a bit odd. My friend and I played the heck out of this game back then. We didn't have a whole group to play with at the time, so a lot of times it was just me and him. And this was the perfect game for that. It was a role-playing game that was very faithful to the source material, and it treated it with great respect. You could, of course, be Bond, but you could equally create your own 00 MI6 agent. NPCs and villains from the movies up until that point are all there, with a couple of notable exceptions. There's a very famous court case on the rights to the movie Thunderball. And along with it, the villainous organization Spectre and Bond's nemesis Blofeld. And it ended up affecting this game as a result. So fans were a little confused when the PC's main foil was revealed to be an organization called Tarot. Its director was one Carl Ferenc Scorpius, who eschewed Blofeld's white fluffy cat for a very menacing-looking hound. I guess points there, I suppose. But given the legal constraints, they did the best with what they could with Tarot. And honestly, maybe it was a little freeing to develop this new organization at a time when movie fans had actually already said goodbye to Blofeld and Spectre. He was gone by this point. Now, the rules for this game are, in retrospect, a little clunky. Skill checks were percentile-based, and like a lot of games at that time, it required consulting charts. In this case, 2, to determine whether a check or a combat roll failed or succeeded, and what level of success there was. That's also how you determine how much damage you did to an opponent in combat. It was kind of odd. At the time, it was sort of all we knew, but nowadays it would seem a little needlessly complex. But it is still playable. The rules allow you to pretty much simulate everything Bond did, from gunplay to chases to, yes, seduction. In fact, the last stage of a successful seduction attempt was when and where. For a 13-year-old kid, that was something. Boy, let me tell you. The system also had something called hero points, which allowed you to affect rolls in your favor and kind of do cool stunts as well. And it's probably one of the first RPGs to incorporate this kind of mechanic. There was also plenty of support for this game at the time. Almost a mandatory buy was the Q manual, which allowed you to give your agent those magnificent toys. There was also For Your Information, which gave new rules, locales, and new non-player characters. And they also produced several adventures based off of the early classic movies. These could be a little odd, especially if you were very familiar with the originals. It sort of felt like a bizarro version of them. Kind of familiar, but they would always throw in a few twists in the plot to avoid a strict retelling of the movies. But the production quality was fantastic. The player handouts in the adventures were great. You would actually give your PCs an envelope, usually with, for your eyes only. And, they had color cutout documents and pictures. It was great. This production value was practically unheard of at the time. One of the last products that they made for this game, Villains, gave your players 7 new foes to fight. And maybe even seeing the smaller nature of Bond's future, one of them was a serial killer with no world-conquering ambitions. That's pretty good stuff and ahead of its time. The license expired in 1987, and it's probably fitting that it ended with the early era Bonds of Connery and Moore. And George Lazenby. I don't say that derisively. Actually, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is an awesome film. If you're a gamer and a Bond fan, this is worth tracking down. To be honest, there's probably better systems to implement the game nowadays. Savage Worlds or something like that. But you could actually port over quite a few things from the original rules. Right now, this game would seem like pure nostalgia, but there was a time when this was cutting edge, and I gotta say, a hell of a lot of fun. All right, so next up, we're going to do our indie comics review. All right, so finally, I have a quick indie comics recommendation. As we know, Wizards of the Coast seems bound and determined to shoot themselves in the foot trying to appease a few thousand lunatics on social media. Well, Marvel and DC, they are old hat at that by now. They have committed industry-wide seppuku in their print comics, catering to these same kind of folks. In the process, they have opened up a door for a flood of independent comics from people like Ethan Van Sciver, Eric July, and a host of others. One of these comics I just received after backing, and I have to say I was actually quite impressed with it. It's called Overmind by sci-fi author John Delarose. It follows the futuristic adventures of Isla Rin, a special agent of the Terran Empire, as she investigates something called Project Overmind on one of the colony planets. When she gets there, she finds out that this project is just as insidious as it sounds, and has some real-world parallels for us today. The story is very well written. It has a nice economy of words. The plot is easy to follow. It has an old-school show, don't tell philosophy, and I really dug it. It's drawn in 4-color beauty by Ms. Crimson. And I actually like the fact that it was not done on glossy paper, which I'm sure was probably a bit of a cost-cutting measure, but it actually suits this kind of material quite well, in my opinion. It took me back to a better time in comics. I really like this book. It delivers action on the surface and a little bit of a message under it, but it doesn't hit you over the head with it either. It's kind of like the writing in Star Trek back when it was at its best. I would recommend this book, and I'm actually looking forward to the coming sequel. All right, so that's going to be all for today. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments below. If you did like it, make sure to like and subscribe, and hit that alarm bell for notifications so you know when I'm dropping a new video. That's going to do it for now. This is your pal Double D signing off. Goodbye, and take care.
What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody.